Welcome to the Wonder AAC and AT Podcast. This series is all about early intervention, and today we have the pleasure of speaking with Griffin Bennett. Cass is an autistic and ADHD AAC advocate, augmentative alternative communication advocate, and consultant whose experience as a parent of multimodal autistic children informs her work coaching parents and presenting to professionals, especially in early supports. And Cass is also on the Northwest Augmentative Communication Society Board of Directors, NWACS, which is how I first heard her name. So Cass, we're excited to talk with you about your own experiences with early intervention and maybe also some highlights from your insights from coaching others. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much for coming. I wonder if you could just start by describing your role and what drew you to the field of early intervention.
Sure. Well, I'm a parent first, right? All of this, everything that I do now, as far as trying to support early intervention, early support teams in supporting early intervention families, is because I was recently an early intervention family, right? And I'm gonna say some things probably that are a little bit heresy, which is I remember a few months after we got out of early intervention, right? After that third birthday, I remember posting on Facebook something like, "What if the most important thing early intervention could do was give kids robust high-tech AAC and get out of the way?"
Hmm.
Because I found the professionals that we worked with really wanted to help, right? They so wanted to help. They were kind people, they were doing their best. The fact is, at that time, we were in the middle of a pandemic. So all of our services were telehealth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my child hated the disembodied voices, right? It just could not handle that, right? So in fact, our sessions were really dysregulating for really everybody involved. Um, so I may not have posted that, right, if I had had an early intervention experience that wasn't all via telehealth, right? So I'm not saying that that's everyone's experience.
Sure.
But my my younger daughter, her speech was not developing typically, right? And her older sister had been delayed, but this felt different. This felt she had basically a cap of 10 words. She had five that stayed. So we had like mama, dada, no, bye, um, and I think key for kitty, right? Or actually, no, I think the fifth one was wee, like when you go around a corner, right? That counted as a word. And then an additional five that would kind of come and go. So let's say we get Nana for banana. Um, but if we were going to hit that 11th word, we'd realize that it had been weeks since we had heard hi, which we had
Mm.
gotten, a couple months before that, but it just couldn't stick around if we got a new one. And
Mm-hmm.
that pattern just really held constant for months, like, 6, 7 months. And so I was like, I don't know what's going on here. Um, and so we were actually in early intervention. We had speech services there, and then we were also in private speech. Um, and I had inquired about AAC, um, and this was 2021, right?
Mhm.
So we're a few years back. Um, and both private speech therapy and early support speech therapy said that she was not a good candidate for robust high-tech AAC because she would not engage at all
Mm.
with lower tech and light tech AAC. So any sort of um, laminated symbols, laminated pictures, anything like that, core boards, it was a non-starter. And in fact, she had really strong reactions against it. I remember distinctly, this was a kid who was not communicating very much, but she tried to put that laminated flip book in the trash. Like she tried to open the trash and put it in, right? And if that's not like communication, I don't know what is, right?
Right.
Um,
I
so
love it.
he
I
was,
love it.
yeah, right. Um, so because of that, they had said she's not a good candidate for robust high-tech AAC, right? And as a non-professional at the time, I thought, wow, to me, it feels like almost a higher skill development to be able to do the interpretation of symbolic symbols without sort of the vocal output confirming the meaning,
Mm-hmm.
right? Versus a speech generating device where, you can push that button and I know what it means, you know what it means, I know what it means. We're all on the same page about what it means, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I was, you guys are the professionals. I'm just a mom, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I said, well, we'll wait until we get into the school district services. Um, the sort of amazing thing that happened for us was the timing of Jordan Zimmerman's documentary, This Is Not About Me,
Mm-hmm.
came out in fall of 2021. And we rented it. And it honestly changed the trajectory of, I think, our whole family's lives, right?
Wow.
I saw the really powerful way um, that her challenging behaviors were used as justification for why she couldn't handle more access to more robust communication tools.
Mhm.
Um, when in fact it was, a cycle, right? She was stuck
Yes.
because of the frustration, right? Um, and I could see that in my little girl, right? This was a little girl who was 2. She was um, so frustrated all the time. It was a really challenging time. Um, you know, headbutting and head banging and to me, I just really felt it was related to communication, right? I really felt like she couldn't get out what she wanted to say.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and watching that documentary, my husband and I looked at each other and we're like, oh, we can't wait, right? Like we don't want, so Jordan was 18 and a half when she was finally given access to robust communication. Um, and now she has master's degrees and is in, she's only in her 20s now, so it's not long
Right.
ago. Um, so it convinced us that, you know what, it didn't matter what advice we were getting from EI and from private services. We needed to do this no matter what, even if it was just going to be little old me leading the way, right?
Mhm.
Mm. Amazing that how that documentary changed your path. We'll definitely link to that documentary. It's such a great movie for many reasons. And Jordan Zimmerman is um, she's an autistic AAC user,
Mhm.
right? And like you said, didn't get access to AAC communication supports till she was an adult. Yeah.
And it changed her school placement, her opportunities, lots of things. But I resonate with a couple things you said, Cass. First of all, I feel like if you are not functionally verbal, there is likely something going on with your sensory system related to all of that. And so the thing about the Velcro laminate pictures is that's another sensory experience, visually, tactily. And so it is a myth that that's a prerequisite to AAC, but that old thinking is still alive and well in too much of our early intervention for sure. And if your sensory system is not regulated, then we don't know when they're wanting to communicate their best form of sensory, meaning is it vision? Is it auditory? Is it tactile? So, tactile meaning touch the screen, see the picture, hear the voice, because we don't know which of those things is their best mode in that moment. So having the robust system right off the bat means that if their vision is helping their language, great. If they need to touch something, they can still touch it. I mean, it's required to touch it, and that gets their body focused on it. And then they get that verbal output, and they get to, if they're listening, then that helps too. And it's pulling it all together for them.
Mm-hmm.
So many times in early intervention, PECs or pictures aren't working, and the high tech works beautifully. So I love that right off the bat, you're pointing out this is not best practice and certainly should not be used on our early intervention population who is still figuring out their sensory system.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think I'm very happy that there has been, I have definitely noticed the last few years, more people have understood, okay, there are no prerequisite skills for
There we
robust tech AAC. And that honestly, when I started speaking, that was the main point I was trying to make, right? Like,
Mhm.
I swear there are no prerequisites, right?
Right.
So I think more and more folks are on board with there being no prerequisite skills for robust high-tech AAC, which is wonderful. And frankly, I understand why the gatekeeping was there in the first place. Um, because to a certain extent, because you had to, these systems cost tens of thousands of dollars in some cases, right? But tech has changed so dramatically in such a short period of time that that hasn't really trickled down into how we access
Mm-hmm.
these supports, right? And certainly hasn't really trickled down into the training around how, professionals who maybe went to grad school, never even had an AAC course, so only heard what they heard through professional development, and they
Mm-hmm.
didn't really have to think about it too much because it was so inaccessible to most people, right?
Right.
And the landscape has for sure changed. Um, but now that more and more families are getting it, more and more early intervention agencies are supporting it, there's still a lot of discomfort around, but what does it look like, right? What does it look like to actually work on AAC with toddlers?
Mhm.
And I think that's something that when I when I was out of early intervention, and we were still on this really early journey, I didn't realize the lack of knowledge there, right? And I realized about a year later that I had stories to tell, right? I had sort of an experience from having done that firsthand in a parent-led way, um, that could maybe support professionals in supporting other families and support families themselves directly.
Yeah, there's nothing like hearing the actual experience from families, from AAC users, from people who are going through the process to better support us as professionals, right?
So one thing I want to tell there's a story that happened, like I call it the donut story, and it's how I start all of my presentations about AAC. And she turned 3 like 3 months before. So she's newly 3 years old. Um, and it ties into the Jordan documentary.
Hmm.
Um,
So this is your youngest daughter.
the youngest daughter. So the donut story. Uh, well, first off, my every presentation I've ever done was I should say I hate public speaking. Hate it. Like I break out in hives. It is my nemesis. If you would have told me 5 years ago that I would be talking to you right now doing this, I would have been like, that's a lovely idea for someone else, but I would never do that, right? And I
Hmm.
would have been completely serious.
Hmm.
But being autistic myself, there's like a justice orientation that kicks in, right? When you're like, I need to help, right?
Hmm.
So it really pushed me past my comfort zone on that front. And I'm glad to do it. But the very first time that I pulled together all of the early stories from our earliest AAC days was to put together almost a case to the special education admin in our school district about how we had been doing AAC and what we had seen, and then to make a case for that being how we structured her specially designed instruction.
Hmm.
Right. So they had not, we took a year off in between early intervention ending and preschool. But we went ahead and got the IEP and we went through all the process, right? But I realized they didn't do AAC the same way, right, in the school district, because we had gone into our evaluation, and the SLP who was part of her evaluation looked at our AAC device, which by that time was just a 45 grid, like it was not huge, and we were on our way up, right? But she looked at that and said, "Oh, that's a lot."
Mm.
And it's just one of those comments that sticks with you as like, ruh-roh, right? I need some education here.
Well, the fact that you said just a 45 grid, Cass, I think a lot of people listening would say, "Oh, wow, 45 still," right?
And
So,
she was up to a 77, a 7 by 11 by her third birthday, right? And it doesn't mean that she like knew where everything was by her third birthday or anything like that. I
Mhm.
just knew we were um, going to be wanting her to have access to as much vocabulary as possible. And we didn't want to keep changing the motor plan
Right.
every time we upped grid sizes, right?
Right. Good
So
idea.
we sort of had to find a spot, right, that was big enough that we thought it could last her some years, and start there once we realized that she could isolate and she could pick
Sure.
the buttons deliberately, right? Um, so the very first how I realized like let me kick off this presentation, introduce someone to my daughter. Um, is I tell the donut story. So we were hanging out in our living room one morning, and I had AAC out and her device, and I said, "Do you want eggs or cereal?" Right? And I just pressed the buttons, and she went and pushed donut. And I said, haha, like very funny. Can't have a donut. What do you want? Right. And then she held it down and made it plural. And so it said donuts. And when you do that in Proloquo to Go, it doubles the donut icon. So it like shows two donuts. Right. So I said, oh, two donuts. You're very clever. What do you want other than a donut? She navigates to the more expansive desserts menu and presses every dessert that is right. And she gets to pie, and I say, "You don't even like pie," right? And she goes and finds donut again and holds it down and says, "Donuts." And she's just grinning, right? Like she knows she's joking. We're having a good time. And it hit me that that was a meltdown. That was 3 months prior, 6 months prior, maybe even 1 month prior. That was a meltdown. And instead, that was a joking, good, bonding, connecting parent-child interaction that felt wonderful, right? Um, and I realized, like, I did the whole parenting thing of give them two options you're fine with, right?
Mhm.
Cereal or eggs,
Right.
right? So if
Right.
I were making a textbook, I would have had cereal or eggs
Right.
and maybe a couple of other options. But I'll tell you what I wouldn't have put in there, donut, something I was not prepared to give her for breakfast, right?
Mhm.
And speaking kids get to say, hey, those two options you gave me, no, I want this other thing, right?
Mhm.
And non-speaking kids, like without the ability to do that, of course, you're going to get what looks like just challenging behaviors, right? And that frustration lives within them. That I honestly think sort of that the panic and the distress that comes from knowing that your whole day is just full of those moments, right?
Mhm.
Where everyone is doing their best, kind of, mostly, right? I could have given donut as an option, but I wasn't going to, right? I think maybe doing my best, according to her, would have been having a choice between like donut or candy bar, right? I would do that.
She's still a
Um,
kid.
Still a kid, exactly, right? Um, so I wanted more families to realize um, that these interactions like can happen, right? They can happen, that the path on how you get there is not linear at all. If you have this idea that you're doing like therapy or any like learning activity with a toddler, an autistic toddler, and have that it's going to go like exactly to your plan, like you got some things to learn still,
Right.
right? Like,
Right.
so I just wanted I want folks to understand that it's worth the time,
Mhm.
right? It's worth the investment, um, and as a parent, there are really practical ways that investing in that is not only good for your child, but it's going to help your family as a
Oh.
unit so much too,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I wanted to sort of, I want to send the message to parents
Mhm.
that this looks scary. This looks like a lot of tech that is confusing, that only the experts really understand. None of your friends know about it,
Mhm.
right? But it doesn't have to be scary. And when you start young, you get to learn with them
Mhm.
at a pace that is sustainable, right? Because the topics that are like sort of low-hanging fruit for you as a grown-up learning are developmentally appropriate uh,
Mhm.
for the 2-year-old, the 3-year-old, the 4-year-old, in a way that they're not necessarily, right? To sit there and talk colors and shapes, and while you sit there and draw and do modeling during routine activities,
Mhm.
that gets to be a dodgier engagement issue, right? As kids get older and older, right? So you're really doing yourself a favor in addition to supporting your child by looking at these things earlier.
Love that.
I
What
love
are
that.
some of those other practical parenting tips?
I try to tell folks when they're starting off to just identify 2 points during your day, right? That your day already exists where it's easiest for you to make sure that you have device within reach, right? And be modeling on what's going on. So for us, it was anytime we were eating, and we used to draw for huge portions of the day. Like, and our drawing was like, just dots, a lot of dots and a lot of big circles. Um, but we got into some fun habits with that really allowed for expansion, right? Because she would then tell me anytime she pushed something on her device, I would treat it like an instruction, right? I would be like, oh, you want me to draw a red circle? Like, sure, all right, let me draw a red circle. And sort of think of how you can help them understand um, that it's an empowerment tool, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it really does, um, give them the ability to have a say in things that they never had a say
Yes.
before, right? So have them see you use device talking to other people,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I'm not a big fan of teaching requesting, but I'm a big fan of autistic kids seeing you use device for your own requests of other people and having those people be responsive, right? As
Mhm.
far as teaching, like these are powerful tools,
So
right?
what does that look like?
At home, that looks like using because she did not like me touching her device. Um, so I eventually had to put it also on another tablet. And we keep everything in guided access mode. I'm like real strict about that. So she
Mhm.
had never seen tablets do anything other than AAC.
So for parents or anyone listening who's not familiar with guided access mode, it's just a way to kind of lock into one app. And so you can't push the home button to get into other apps like YouTube or whatever else might be interesting.
So I had my AC, she had hers, that are just iPads, right? So, I mean, our house has sort of an open living, dining, kitchen area. Like the second floor is just big and open, right? So if I'm over here and I'm playing with the kids, like my husband's in the kitchen, like me being able to click make it loud, right? And say, honey, can you bring me my water? Like just me and using device to make my selections or whatever. And seeing him be responsive to that, right? To me was so much more impactful than sort of getting into weird power dynamics of like, say it on your talker. Can you say it on your talker? That never went well for us. And instead, what I would do is, like, for instance, we have a place on our counter where we keep the bananas, right? And so if she's reaching up there, she wants a banana. I know she wants a banana. She knows I know she wants a banana, right? There's a school of thought that would have me go over to her and be like, "Oh, I think you want a banana. Can you say what you want on your device? Can you push banana?" What, like that before I would get the banana, right? Instead, I get the banana. I walk over, I open the banana, and then I talk about the banana on her device, right? Like I open the banana model open. I open it up to one big thing I did with her was modeling feels like and tastes like words.
Mm.
Uh, she had a lot of really strong sensory sensitivities, and us having shared language for describing our sensory experience felt really important. So I would often describe food things in the textural taste like and feels like way. And so I would use that opportunity, right? Because in my mind, we never want someone to view their device as a barrier. We don't want her to resent the device as what's getting in the way
Yes.
of her getting the thing that she needs or wants, right?
What I love about all of that is that what you're talking about is total communication, right? Her gestures are saying, "I want the banana." You even said of the 10 words, Nana was one of them sometimes, right? So even your like say it could have come in onto play, but she's saying it with her total communication body language, right? But what I like about the banana story and the donut story is you're responding, not necessarily delivering. So she says donut, you don't have donuts, but you're responding. You're responding to that language, which is what we would do with a verbal child, right? And so it doesn't, when you remove the donut or hide donut or don't allow donut to be part of a language system because you can't deliver, it is just a giant choice making machine. When they can talk about anything when they want to, but you're not saying find the donut or find the banana, then when they bring it up, it's spontaneous. So your response is authentic, right? That's communication every which way. And then they feel so seen and heard that that behavior is non-existent in that moment because they're able to be silly. And I will say this, kids that are very frustrated, it's a sign of intellect, right? That they have a lot to say and they don't know how to say it. That's the frustration. It's easy as professionals to point out that, oh, your kid must be really smart because we don't live with them 24/7 and deal with the high level frustration. But definitely that frustration is a sign of a disconnect between all that I have to say and what I have available to me, as well as the sense of humor is also a sign of intellect, right? Donuts. And then, oh, really? What else would you want? And she goes to desserts. I mean, the frustration and the humor is like, this girl is a smart, smart girl. And if we don't give her robust language and if we don't give her opportunities to say whatever quirky idea comes into her mind, we're not even letting her be her.
And I think it's important to realize that, like, if I weren't making these arguments, her paperwork did not reflect that idea, Brenda. Like, her paperwork was done with traditional assessments, right?
Mhm.
And in no way sort of picked up, right? That those dynamics were part of it, right?
Mhm.
And I realized after the donut story, like, I realized that it had been, about 6 months since I had been headbutt, and I hadn't realized it. You know what I mean? Like that kind of like I lived it, right? I lived the difference in both of our nervous systems,
Yeah.
right? Because I was an extension of her. She was an extension of mine at that age, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's important to realize that like we need to really trust parent concerns and parent perspectives on that, while also making sure that parents are educated and informed on just because a kid isn't using verbal speech does not mean that intellect isn't there, right? There are certain things that sometimes we need to inform parents of on baseline knowledge. But I've seen so many parents be like, my child is very smart, right? Just cannot demonstrate that in the way that your assessments are requiring,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I've seen that sort of be met with, oh yeah, that's a bummer, right?
Right.
But then the path forward is still the path forward.
Mhm.
And we're doing a really big disservice to huge populations of
Mhm.
kids whose motor does not match their ability to express
Mhm.
what's going on, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
Mhm.
think you make a really good point. There's a lot of reframing that professionals can do to think about what is that stu child telling us with their behaviors, with their actions, with their interactions. And like you said, she was communicating already. It wasn't through speech necessarily all the time.
One thing that um, when I'm presenting about AAC and I'm talking about it, I often get questions about like, what my kid just wants to stim on the device. My kid is just stimming on the device, right?
Yeah, what do you say?
Um, Man, that that was such an important part of our journey. Um, when we first got AAC, first got her device, it arrived in let's see, early 2022. Um,
And she was
and
3 years old?
she was
Two
two,
years old. Okay.
and uh, and I had ideas because I was going against our professional. So I was like, it's got to be done right. Do you know what I mean? Because I was still seeing that early intervention SLP and our private SLP, and they were sort of looking at me a little bit like, well, aren't you doing something, right?
Let's see
And
how this goes.
we'll see how this goes, Mom, right? I mean, they're lovely people,
Yes.
but I felt a tremendous amount of pressure, uh,
Hmm.
Yes.
and so that was difficult. The kind of cool thing about working with a toddler is that like you quickly realize that like no matter what your plan had been, like there's still going to be a toddler and your plan is really not going to mean much, right? So at the beginning, she only wanted to spend time with her device by herself with no one else touching it. And it looked a lot like just stimming on her device,
Mhm.
right? I would try to get involved. She would get really possessive. And I was like, well, I want her to be possessive of her device. I want her to feel like that is hers, right? So I just need to let this happen a little bit, right? And we also got COVID right after it came.
Yeah.
Uh, so we had ended up getting our device through UW Autism Center's evaluation process. And when that happens, you get 6 sessions. We got 6 sessions with their SLP, and then you're cut loose.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Didn't even start those 6 sessions,
Mhm.
and because we got COVID immediately.
Right. So you're on your own
So we
completely.
were really on our own for I think 5 weeks before with the device. And I was like, well, until we can see that SLP, I'm just gonna let her do what she wants, right?
Mhm.
Mm. So she was pressing buttons. She wanted to be on the landing on our stairs, kind of behind the diaper caddies. So she had like a little cubby that she would sit over there and press buttons. And I started to hear whispering coming from the landing. And this is a kid who had never imitated us in gesture or vocalization. So sign was a non-starter. And she had never imitated us in like, you do elephant, like elephant with a trunk.
Yeah.
You do that sort of thing. She had never imitated that. She had never done any gestural or vocal imitation. Um, every time I would get closer to the landing, when I would hear sort of the sounds, she would stop. So it was very clear she was not ready for, other people to be involved in this.
Mhm.
Hmm.
It over the course of 3 months, it gets louder and louder. And then she is confidently using her device to prompt her own immediate echolalia, um, which just blew me away.
Yeah.
Feels just hearing it.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't think she would have the access to spoken language that she has now, because she prefers to speak, right? Her speech is not very discernible.
Mhm.
So AAC is still really important for us.
Mhm.
Um, but she really does prefer to speak because it's easiest, like as far as it's what everybody else is doing in her
Right.
classroom, but right?
We're
So
all going to do what comes easiest.
what comes easiest,
Sure.
right? So she she would go through and press buttons until she got to the thing she wanted to say, and then she would repeat the thing she wanted to say.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
and I don't think that sort of, which is what allowed for her to start sort of on any kind of verbal communication development timeline, right? She did not have that
Mm.
before at all.
Yeah.
So I never make promises, right, about what's going to happen for any kid, at all.
Right.
But I do really strongly think that if we hadn't had that intervention, and if I hadn't trusted my gut that what
Mhm.
she was doing was important, even though it wasn't being used, quote unquote, for a communicative function in that moment,
Mhm.
right? That I needed to lean into my trust of my child, that she was being internally competent in choosing to do that.
Right.
Right.
Um,
And that she needed that. What worked for her was that verbal output of a high-tech device, right? The
And I think
verbal.
the repetition, the ability to do it, we know as an autistic adult, social interactions are fraught, right? Like it is difficult. So you think about being an autistic toddler, right? We know it takes more social, emotional, mental bandwidth, right? To engage in those social back and forths and to like be present and sort of, you know, suppress all the like sensory distractions and really hone in, right? What if we had something that would allow kids who wanted to listen to just the voice thing, right? Just the voice outfit without all the other sort of social demands and aspects, um, sort of clouding the interaction. She didn't have to wait on me to say what she wanted to say so that she could practice it, right? She could sort of lead on her own terms, um, without sort of the interference
Mhm.
of those of us who are trying to help, right?
Right.
um, yeah,
So, Cass, you mentioned that you wanted your child to have more opportunity for communication when she was little. You recognized that she might need AAC. You watched the documentary and said, I'm we're doing this no matter what someone tells me, right? So, how did you actually go about getting in the device then?
sure. Great question. We got really lucky on timing. So I was sitting there trying to like DIY. There were a few places that were online that were talking about DIYing it. And so um I had like an Amazon cart saved of like getting a new iPad and then we actually got called off the wait list, which we had been on for a gazillion years, not really, but a long time it felt like.
Hmm.
And our daughters went through the diagnostic process for had neuropsych evaluations, and UW opened up in her in the referral, and there's like 10 pages of potential referrals at the end of those documents. And one of them was for an AAC evaluation. And I was shocked because, again, the professionals in our lives had said she's not a good candidate. So I was like, you'll do this? And so apparently UW had sort of changed um, to sort of lower the age and access to or access barriers um, for autistic kids at age 2 to sort of start that process very recently. And I
Mm.
did not know that we were on sort of uh, the forefront of that change at all.
Hmm.
So like a year later, I had no idea. So I thought I was going to sort of pop my head up after this, parent-led thing and be in community with a ton of other people who had been doing the same thing. And but were a little bit ahead of me, and that was not the case, right? Um, so we got very lucky as far as being able to do it through UW. I will say that AAC evaluations start with low tech, right? So what happens when you get a kid who's super dysregulated by low tech? You never even get to the high tech,
Right.
right? So we got lucky there again, where the SLP said, "Would you like to come back next week and we can just start with the high tech?" And I said, "You'll do that, right?" And she said, "Let's try it." So we went back the next week and we started with high tech, and she touched the device like twice. It's not like she saw the device and was like, "Where have you been my whole life?" It wasn't
Right.
like that. But luckily she was like, let's give it a try, right? Let's see what happens. And we did.
So parents might, in addition for advocating for AAC in general, they might say, my child is autistic. They might benefit from starting with high tech. Can we try that to
Yes.
their AAC evaluator?
Yes.
Yeah.
Or even, I think the fact that I laid the groundwork of, just so y'all know, I know you have a process that you need to do and it's standardized, but she does not react well to low tech, right? So how are we going to ensure she has an actual opportunity to interact with high tech in a way that where she's not already dysregulated, right? They may have an idea for that. That may mean let's start with high tech now, or it may be, hey, if that happens, we can talk about how to cross that bridge. But at least you're not having that conversation after it's already happened and you're dysregulated because it didn't
Right.
go well, right? But making
Right.
sure you're sort of front loading that expectation that if this doesn't go well, this isn't the end of the conversation,
I love
right?
how you frame that. And also because I think a lot of times families feel like I have this one opportunity. I've been waiting for so long. I don't want
Yeah.
to mess it up or lose the opportunity. I love
Yes.
that.
I had a mom one time tell me that if that they learned switches, but when they hit the switch, the dog would bark and flip over, and it scared him. And now it just seeing a switch would scare him. And so he wasn't going to be a person that was going to touch buttons. His body was more complex than that, so he was going to be using alternative access. So honestly, we just went straight to eye gaze because the switches are scary and he's not using his hands. And I didn't need to pull the switch out and make him cry. I
Right.
could take the mom's word for it that this the normal pathway to alternative access is not his. And I think you're right. I think as a parent, reporting all of that is really important. And I think it's important for evaluators to listen.
Right. Right. And I just want to say one thing about it's really important, I think, for families and early supports folks and providers, educators, um, to really fully understand the concept of least dangerous assumption. Because I have seen, I talk to a lot of families who have similar paths because, again, when I popped my head up, I thought there's going to be a whole community. There wasn't. And then I had become somehow the person everybody was coming to about their AAC questions, right? They're getting started now, right? But I see families and parents really internalize the messaging from those evaluation reports, the recommendations um, that are offered as options, right? Um, but you feel pressured to take every option. And so making sure that, you're not deciding at two, at one, at three, at four, at five, that, what is written on this paper is accurately describing my child as they are now, much less as they are going to be later, right? And sort of making decisions that are aligned with your values as a family and um, and your love and the dignity that you want to give your child, right? And knowing that our kids are by definition on different developmental timelines. than non-autistic kids, right? And there's no good data on what a typical autistic developmental timeline is, right? So making sure that we aren't sort of making decisions now that cascade into places we don't know. And I see that a lot when it comes to like school placement and things like that. So that's one thing I just wanted to make sure I mentioned.
I love ending on that advice for families, for advocacy, and for educators to listen. Thank you so much, Cass. How can people hear more from you? I know families and educators are going to want to hear more. So tell us a little bit
Sure.
about that.
So I'm very involved with Northwest Augmentative Communication Society, NWACS, and we have a website. I have some presentations that I've done for NWACS that are up on the NWACS YouTube and things like that. Most of my toddler AAC content and presentations aren't recorded because I show videos, and for her privacy, those aren't anywhere. But I do present pretty frequently. At the Infant and Early Childhood Conference in that happens in May. This will be my second year. And I co-present with AAC SLP about sort of, early AAC and getting started.
That's a great conference. We'll link
Yeah,
that.
it is great, right? Yeah. And I'm happy, honestly. Like if you work for an early intervention agency and you're like, man, my therapists are really struggling on how to communicate like the families, getting buy-in from families or dealing with the stimming issue, right? Or, all of that, I am more than happy to come talk to your teams, talk to your families. Because I really do think AAC changed the trajectory of my daughter's life, right? And I want other families to at least have the opportunity to know that it exists, right? And that it's something to explore and have the best shot at exploring it. And you can also find me on Facebook, Cass Griffin Bennett.
Don't wait. I think your message is don't wait. Don't wait for school-based SLP. Don't wait for all of that to happen because I always say they don't get good at it by waiting. We don't get good at riding a bike by waiting to buy a bike. We don't get good at doing anything by we're just waiting for natural maturity. We have to have exposure. And so I love the message of you going, you know what? No, we're not waiting for aging out of early intervention. We're not waiting for new therapists. We're not waiting for a team that finally sees what we already know about our daughter. Yep. Right?
Thank you so much for joining us today, Cass. This is a really wonderful interview.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
This podcast is produced by the Special Education Technology Center, administered by Central Washington University, and funded in part by OSPI. However, the content does not necessarily represent the policy of CWU and OSPI, and you should not assume endorsement by the state government.